Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thanks for taking a moment to like our video broadcast, to click on the subscribe button, and to get reminders through clicking on the bell icon.
So each week, Todd and I are going to be talking about the gospel lectionary reading for the upcoming weekend. And our hope is that our conversation will be in the context, we talk about these passages in the context of love and justice and inclusion and societal justice. And again, our hope is that our talking will be just, as in justice, but that also something will be said in our exchange back and forth that will inspire you alongside of us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
So we're still in Matthew 16. We're looking at verses 21 to 28 and a little bit of teaching from Jesus on the idea of suffering.
Yeah.
So why don't you kick us off on all that there, Herb?
Well, the first thing that I love about this passage, um, I mean, there's a lot that could be said, but the thing that I love about this passage that always gets me in trouble when I point it out is that for the early church, whenever Jesus talks about the cross in the Gospels, Jesus is never saying, I'm going to do this in your place. I'm going to go do this for you instead of you. He's
Mm.
always saying, I'm going to go do this. And then he opens up the invitation to invite others, his followers, to take up a cross as well. It's
Mm.
always a matter of, in their perception of the story, it is always a matter of participation rather than something Jesus suffered in their place, which
Yeah.
is
Mm-hmm.
interesting given the evangelical explanation of the death of Jesus.
Yeah, there's nowhere in the Gospels that you really get that understanding of of at least in the Synoptic Gospels, a little bit here and there in John, where you get the idea that Jesus is taking the place of everybody else. What Jesus is doing is he's inviting everybody into his life. He's inviting people into the journey of discipleship, the journey uh, of doing the work that he was doing. It was interesting today that I was in a pastor's meeting in my evangelical fundamentalist context and hearing somebody present on the need to listen to Jesus for more than substitutionary atonement, and that was a new revelation to come and to listen to what he actually taught, especially in the Synoptic Gospels. And so I was glad to hear somebody kind of awakening to that reality today in what they were presenting.
Yeah, and it's not just a one-off. I mean, I have a quick list here. Matthew 10:38, Mark 8:34, Luke 9:23, Luke 14:27. All of those are those hard passages where Jesus says, if you're not willing to take up the cross with me, then you're
Yep.
not worthy of me. And that's heavy language. Even the non-canonical Gospel of Thomas, of all things, in
Hmm.
Gospel of Thomas 55, says, Jesus said, whoever doesn't take up their cross like I do isn't worthy of me.
Hmm.
Nowhere is the, again, when we get to Paul and maybe a little bit of John, as you said, then we get into the substitutionary idea a little bit, but well, Paul a lot. But in the synoptics here, it's never Jesus did this for you. It's never Jesus did this as you or
Hmm.
in your place. It's will you follow Jesus? And even in the book of Acts, it's the gospel is never Jesus died for you. The gospel is Jesus is alive, and do you want to follow him?
Right. And there is some, and just to keep this in context, and I hope I'm not going ahead of where you're going,
Oh,
Herb,
no, no, it's
as
good.
um, the cross in the Roman context was people who were hung on a Roman cross were considered traitors to the empire. And so there is this invitation when Jesus is saying, take up your cross. He's inviting people to take up a responsibility and a position and a posture that by definition is opposed to empire, is opposed to the powers that be. And so it's kind of placing yourself, by definition, by following Jesus, you are placing yourself at odds with empire as it is constructed in his time and in our time. And so there has to be, I think, an understanding also, which I think is a radical understanding for us today, is to say, can we say we are really in the way of Jesus and not be fundamentally opposed to at least some of what our American empire system is, if we're not at least honest critics of aspects of it. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been benefits and there hasn't been good done within American culture and American government, but to be honest about the ways that it has harmed people and it continues to exclude and harm others in the process. So I think that that's part of the whole process of understanding, again, moving away from the substitutionary penal atonement of the cross as a redemptive act and recognizing it as treachery and opposition to empire that harms people.
And I want to also affirm, I appreciate the great care that you're taking in the language that you're choosing to use there. Because I don't believe that a cross is necessarily intrinsic to following Jesus, but standing up to injustice and systems, like you say, of empire, but systems of injustice, that is intrinsic to following Jesus. And the cross only comes into your Jesus following if the people in power that you're opposing become so threatened that they threaten you with a cross if you don't shut up. You know what I mean? Right. At that moment, then now there's a cross involved for you in following Jesus. But following Jesus is not a death cult. It's not a we're here to die. And that's one of the areas I disagree a little bit with Bonhoeffer. And I'm very careful not to critique Bonhoeffer very hard because, he was facing things in life that I was never going to I hope I'm never going to face. And certainly for Bonhoeffer facing the Nazis, for him following Jesus, the call to follow Jesus was a call to die. I get what he's saying there, but it's only because of the intrinsic nature of the opposition there. Jesus didn't come to die. Jesus chose to live, and he chose not to let go of life, even when threatened with death for doing so. And that's there's a subtlety there that makes a big difference in how we respond to injustice in our own world.
Yeah, no, I think it's well said that it's not a death cult. That's Jesus didn't come to die, and that's such a that language isn't so much of our worship music. That language isn't so much of the preaching that's done. He did not come to die. He came to lead people to a better life, and he realized that by leading people how to live, there would be people who would be opposed to what he was trying to do because it would undermine them. It would take away power and wealth and privilege from them, and so he knew that there would be challenges along the way, but he did not come fundamentally to die, which is where you and I would disagree a little bit with his speaking in verse 21, where he's predicting his death and resurrection. And we would say that's probably more of a Matthew creation, a Matthean creation, to prove that Jesus had foreknowledge of the fact that he was going to die and rise from the dead. But it doesn't seem like that Jesus, in so much of what he was doing, was on a march to death. He was on a march to bring life, and death got in the way.
That's right. The death of Jesus, his crucifixion, was an interruption to his salvific work that the cross overcame. and enabled to continue on in spite of the cross. But what you just said there too, I want to be there's options when we come to this passage. Certainly the early church and the authors of the gospels, the early Jesus community, they were grappling with how to make sense out of Jesus's state execution. Absolutely. And so, yeah, exactly what you just said. Or, or it just could have gotten to the place in Jesus's own trajectory where he now knew there's no turning back. They're not going to
Mm-hmm.
back down, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
certainly not going to back down. We're both headed for an event. He could
Yeah.
have seen that as an unavoidable outcome to the decisions he had made to go to
Sure.
Jerusalem, to protest in the temple. He could have known
Right.
in that kind of way, not in a supernatural way, but just in the same way that you and I can say, you know what, if I do this, this is going to be the
See the
consequence.
writing on the wall. Yeah.
Yeah, could have been. I mean, that's one option.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, like you said, and like I said earlier, I don't believe Jesus came to die. Jesus came to show us how to live, and death does not bring life. Life brings life.
Right.
We choose to take hold of life and to not let go of life. The question for the Christian is never, do you want to die? The question is always, do you really want to live?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. I do have a word of caution. Oh, before we even get to that, um, it's kind of comical. That's why I want to share it. But John Dominic Crossan and Marcus Borg, in their book, The Last Week, What the Gospels Really Teach About Jesus's Final Days in Jerusalem, they make this point, and it's always lodged in my brain because of the humor in it. But they write, for the Gospel of Mark, it's about participation with Jesus and not substitution by Jesus. Mark has those. I know we're in Matthew this week, but this is their commentary on Mark. Mark has those followers recognize enough of that challenge that they change the subject and avoid the issue every time. And that's true in
Mm.
Matthew, that's true in Luke. Every time Jesus brings this up, they're never like, yeah, sign me up. Where do I sign my name? They always, you know what I'm saying? There's no mistaking it for them. They
Right.
understand exactly in the story what Jesus is calling them to. And every time they change the subject. I don't want to talk about that. You know,
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
yeah.
But that's
So
exactly right. It is. It's a participation. It's not a substitution. They say, "All right, Jesus, if you want to go ahead and do that, that's all right." No, they every time he talks it up, they say, "Oh crap, that means we're going to be there too." Dang it.
right, right. So my word of caution this week is using, if we move into the way of interpreting Jesus's cross as something we're called to bear, something we're called to participate in, like the cup that he drank or the baptism that he was baptized with,
Mm.
where he says, you know, can you drink of the cup? Can you be baptized? You know, will you come bear the cross? If we define those in a participatory way, there is a word of caution, I think, that has to come alongside that too. And I share this because I grew up with a single mother, who was not always a single mother. She was married multiple times. She's no longer alive, but during her life, she was married multiple times. And some of those marriages were to quite abusive husbands. And I remember pastors telling my mother that in some of those abusive situations, that was her cross to bear, that she should
Mm.
be like
Mm.
Jesus,
Mm.
bear her cross. And the hope would be that she might one day convert her husband through just bearing that suffering.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah. Lord have mercy. That's the right response. That is not just bad theology and bad counseling. That kind of counsel has been proven lethal to
That's right.
so many spouses
That's right.
throughout its history. People
Yeah.
have died from listening to that counsel.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been way too much keeping people in their place through this carrying your cross type of thing. And
So whether we're talking about marginalized and oppressed communities, whether we're talking about abused partners, whatever we're talking about, I just want to remind people that again, the cross is the pushback to standing up to injustice.
Right.
It's not passively bearing the injustice, if that makes
Right.
sense. It's not I'm suffering this injustice, but Jesus told me to bear my cross, so I just have to patiently and passively endure. No, if you don't speak out against the injustice, but you just passively bear it,
Right.
then there is no cross to bear. The
No.
cross, you only bear the cross when you're willing to stand up and speak out and say this is wrong.
Right.
And then those who are threatened by that speaking out, they basically threaten you with the cross, saying either shut up or we'll do this to you.
Right.
And at that point you could, and that's the language of this week's passage. What does it gain? If you gain the whole world but forfeit your soul. Okay,
Mm.
so you become silent about this injustice, but you lose touch with who you are and what you believe in and the
Yeah.
kind of human being you want to be. That again, and I cannot say this enough, that if you don't speak out, if you remain passive in the face of injustice, it's at that moment that there is no cross to bear. You
Mm.
only bear a cross as a result of refusing to shut up, refusing to be silent, refusing to be passive. The cross is not the initial injustice that you're speaking out against. The cross is the pushback for you speaking out against that initial injustice.
Right. Right. Yeah. Jesus is talking to people who are supposed to be ministering his work of liberation. He's not
Mm-hmm.
talking to victims of violence and oppression when he's using this language. This is a conversation between him and his disciples, people who he is intending to lead into the same type of work that he is doing. And so he is talking to people who are supposed to be carrying on his mission. He is not talking to the oppressed. When he's talking to the oppressed, he's using language like the Beatitudes. He's using language and he's using the work of healing to set people free from the bondage they're in. He is not looking at cancer as a cross to bear.
Right.
He's not looking
Right.
at any illness or any abuse or any type of spiritual oppression taking place as the cross. That's different language, different acts in response. In those instances, he's going in and liberating people.
And I
In
think
in
you and
the
I both grew up in a Christian culture where that's the way this language was used. Any hardship that you endured was just your cross to bear.
right,
And that's not it at all. It's the cross was the state execution for his demonstration with the
that's right.
money changers tables.
Yeah,
If you
that's right.
don't have a demonstration, then there is no cross. And again, I think that's why even in our reading this week, you have that language of, you could be silent, you could be passive, but what does it profit you if you gain the whole world through your silence, but you
Yeah,
lose your soul in the process? You lose who you are in the process.
yeah, that's right. And that again, all that language where he says, "If you lose your life for me, you find it." It's again, that's not a death cult march. He's saying that if you lose some of what you've profited by in the past in order to follow me, you'll find out there's a whole lot more. Again, it's not this uh, anytime where he uses those flip the script of the first will be last, the last will be first, all that type of stuff. He's talking to people who are willing to give things up for the sake, giving privilege up for the
Mm-hmm.
sake of following and experiencing a better life through following Jesus than by passively suffering under something else. So Jesus is not going to have a problem with women standing up to abusive husbands. Jesus is not going to have problems with black standing up to racism, institutional racism. He's not going to have a problem with LGBTQ people standing up for their rights. There's none of that is selfish or not accepting your cross. That is actually saying no. We're fighting against empire systems at work.
That's right. And it is that standing up that creates kind of the environment, the I don't know the right phrase to use here, but there's an environment that's created in that standing up to those things that Jesus would affirm that creates pushback, whatever that pushback is.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
in those moments that Jesus would say, keep following me, take up the pushback,
Yeah.
don't be silent, keep pushing. Change is just around the corner. Um, yeah, he would be calling those who are standing up. And I can think in my own life, first, an egalitarian world will always be threatening to those who benefit, who are privileged by a non-egalitarian world.
Hmm.
You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And so there's always going to be pushback by the powers that be whenever we push towards a just, more compassionate, safe world for everybody. But in my own story, in my own walk, these passages have tremendous meaning for me because every time I've had to take a stand for something that I felt was a matter of justice, whether it be women in Christian ministry, whether it was against racism within faith communities, or whether it was about LGBTQ inclusion, or whatever the issue was at hand that I was taking a stand on, it has always come at a serious cost
Hmm.
to the privilege that I experience
Yeah.
because of my social location.
Right.
And so these passages affirm to me that when I make those decisions to say no, justice is more important than what I could get out of being silent here or turning a blind eye. It, it, these passages speak to me that I'm in the right story. They're
Yeah.
confirming. There's
Right.
confirmation here, saying you're on the right path. You're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's encouragement, I think, to any of us who have at times taken stands. You, it, there is, it is worth the battle, and life is more. This is not a good phrase, but life is more alive when you continue in this work than when you passively sit on the sidelines and don't engage in it. And
Mm.
that's been true in my experience, and I know it is for you as well.
Oh,
But it is hard.
absolutely.
But it's
It
hard.
is hard. I don't want to downplay the hardness of it because it is difficult. It's not the same level of difficulty for an ally as it is for the communities that are suffering the oppression. I
Hmm.
get that. But there is something to this. Those who are willing to lose their life for justice. Now, the passage is for me. I'm going to inject justice. Those who are willing to lose their life for justice will find it. Man, I can look back at all that I've lost as a result of some of the hills that I was willing to die on, to use
Hmm.
that cross-centered phrase. Those crosses I was willing to, those hills that I was willing to die on. I can look back at those losses, and even with those losses, I look at my life today and say, wow, this is true. I have really found
Hmm.
a life
Yeah.
that's worth living, what life is about, what a life that's worth living for.
Yeah.
This is like what I had before. I don't want to go back to where I was before these things were brought to my doorstep and I had to take certain stands and positions. I
Yeah.
don't want to go back to that. Even with all the losses, I can say this is truly living. This is truly living,
Yeah. Yeah. Same for me.
even with the sacrifices.
Right. Yeah. So what else you got?
Again, I want to just zero in again that the last thing that I always like to emphasize whenever we talk about imitating or participating with Jesus is that the cross, again, we're not a death cult. The cross is not something that is intrinsic to following Jesus. Justice, love, inclusion, those are intrinsic to following Jesus.
Hmm.
The cross is only there when those who are threatened by those things choose to threaten you for doing those things. And in those moments, don't let go. Don't let go of life.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's Yeah, if anything that comes through from today is, yeah, don't give up on what you're doing. And this is where you hold on to. I mean, that Jesus is it is put in Jesus' mouth that he predicts his resurrection in this passage, and uh, and that is something to hold on to into this, is that life follows the path of the cross. If it is difficult, but there's always more life on the other side, um, by by following Jesus and by doing his work of liberation and inclusion.
Without getting into the scientific debates around the bodily resurrection of Jesus in the stories, I can say, even with all the scientific knowledge that I have today from my own story, I believe in resurrection. I
Yep.
believe that life can still happen after death.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I use that metaphorically. And I'm not encouraging anybody to die or take needless risks. What I am saying is that um, when you think you're Christian, and I'll say this to ministers and pastors out there, when you think your Christian ministry is dead because of the stands you've had that you've
Mm-hmm.
chosen to take, um, the power of the resurrection is still present and very real. And yeah, I believe in the resurrection because of my own story.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, in those terms.
Yep.
Yeah. Anything else, Todd, from you?
I don't think so. I think we had a good conversation. I think it's run
I
its
love this
course.
passage. I love it. It's very personal and meaningful to me and my own story.
Yeah. Yep. It's good stuff.
All right.
Sir, so where can we find you for more in depth on this and anything else?
You can find me at renewedheartministries.com and everywhere that those clicks take you. Todd, where can we find you for one more
Uh,
weekend?
one more week through Saturday, September 1, you can find September 2, you can find me at Glendale City Church. And beyond that, you'll be able to continue to find me at toddjleonard.com and on social media.
So, Todd, I know that this weekend holds a lot of transition for you. I wish you all the best and all the success in the world with the next steps of your journey, my friend.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And it's good that we'll be able to continue this experience together,
Yeah, let's
uh,
make sure we say
even
that. If
beyond.
anybody's looking at your transition and thinking, are they going to still keep doing just talking? The good news is, yes, we'll be here next week. Tune in next week for another thought provoking discussion.
That's right. We will still be here. So, um, all right, everybody. Thanks for coming in and visiting with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Take care, everyone.